Hi, everybody. I'd like to talk to you about seafood and immune health in the post-COVID era. Immunity is our system of defense against harmful microorganisms, things like bacteria and viruses. We call these pathogens. Here I list the 4 general features of immunity. Firstly, our immune system acts as an exclusion barrier to keep harmful organisms out of the body. Secondly, our immune system can recognize and identify harmful organisms if they break through the exclusion barrier. Thirdly, and importantly, our immune system kills harmful organisms. And then finally, our immune system retains a memory of its immunological encounters. What this means is if an individual becomes reinfected, then the response is faster and more vigorous than it was the first time. This memory component of the immune response is the basis of vaccination, which is very topical right now. So our immune system is very complex, it's very sophisticated. It can recognize, it can eliminate, it can remember. This sophistication comes about because of the many layers within the immune system, particularly the different cell types that go to make up the immune system. Here I list the different components of the immune system, divided into so-called innate or natural immunity and acquired or adaptive immunity. Here I show the many different cell types that exist within the immune system. Each of the different cell types and other functional components has its own individual role within the immune response. For example, cytotoxic T cells and natural killer cells are the cells that kill virally infected cells. These phagocytes are cells that can engulf entire bacteria. B cells or B lymphocytes are the cells that make antibodies. So you see each cell type has its own individual role, but for an integrated, coordinated immune response, all of these cell types have to be working together in a controlled manner. So just to recap, the immune system presents a barrier to stop pathogen entry into the cell, and then we have these powerful cellular components of innate and acquired immunity if the pathogens do break through. Keeping this in mind, it's obvious that weak immunity gives us poor defense against harmful organisms. And what that means is we get infected and infections become more severe, even fatal. Of course, in the last 18 months, weak immune systems have been exposed as a major public health challenge, even in places where infection has not been considered to be a major public health concern. Of course, right now, we have many COVID-19 vaccines available to us, but vaccines work by stimulating the immune response. They train the immune response to better recognize and respond to later infection if it occurs. So vaccines actually often work poorly in those with weak immune systems. We also have this condition, which some people are calling LongCovered. These are the symptoms that remain when people recover from coronavirus infection. Finally, we have emergence of new coronavirus strains. These are mutations from the original parental coronavirus. And of course, several new variants or strains have emerged. So what we have here is a battle between our immune systems to protect us and these harmful viruses. So the virus is adapting, so it's actually evolving to try to evade our immune system. Meantime, our immune system is adapting to fight the virus more effectively. So thinking about immunity is ongoing, and I think it's going to be part of the new normal. And lots of people are going to be interested and concerned about their immunity as we go forward, having experienced the coronavirus pandemic. Now, nutrition is important for supporting the immune function, the immune system. It's one of many components acting to influence immunity. Other things like our physical activity and our physical fitness, whether we smoke or drink alcohol, our body fatness, our gut microbiota, these also all influence the immune system. But nutrients, the things we eat, are also a key component. And that's because the immune system needs many different nutrients to function properly. So here I list 3 vital micronutrients, that is vitamins or minerals, important to supporting immunity. These are actually amongst the most important, but there are lots of important ones. So vitamin D, zinc, and selenium all have key roles in supporting immunity. let's think about dietary sources of each of those three key micronutrients. So vitamin D actually is difficult to get in the diet, but fatty fish are one of the richest dietary sources of vitamin D. Zinc, important sources include many types of seafood, oysters, crabs, lobster, and some fish. Selenium, again, seafood is a really important source. Oysters, crabs, shrimps, fatty fish. So here we see seafood, including different types of fish, as an important source of these three key immune nutrients. So seafood is actually an excellent source of immune-supporting micronutrients. Now, when I think of fish, I think of omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA. This is a fictitious, anonymous quote that I made up just for the presentation today. So what about EPA and DHA in the immune system? So EPA and DHA are really important to supporting the immune system. They're also anti-inflammatory. That means they can reverse the harmful effects of the immune response. And in fact, the anti-inflammatory effects of EPA and DHA are amongst the most widely demonstrated, the most widely investigated of the effects of omega-3s. This is a really important effect in the context of immunity. The reason it's important is our inflammatory response can be a harmful component of immunity. And you would have heard about the cytokine storm in COVID-19. That's actually the inflammatory response kicking off and getting out of hand. So it's really important, as well as supporting the host defense aspects of our immune system, that we control inflammation. This brings me to the third point on the slide, which is sort of one of the great big novel areas about omega-3s, and that is that EPA and DHA are converted in our bodies to what are called SPMs, specialized pro-resolving mediators. What this means is SPMs actually turn off inflammation if it's already started. So this is a double whammy from the omega-3s. They're both anti-inflammatory and pro-resolving. So again, they support the immune system in its defense activities, but they help to control and maybe even reverse the harmful effects of inflammation. So I'll just show you a couple of studies now looking at omega-3s. This first one is about infection. So this is a study we did a while ago, as you'll see, with some researchers in Thailand. So this was a randomized controlled trial where school children in Thailand, they were aged 9 to 12 years, consumed milk 5 days a week for 6 months. They consumed one of two different types of milk, a placebo or control milk. This was the milk that had vegetable oil added to it. And then they had a fish oil containing milk. This milk provided 200 milligrams of EPA and 1,000 milligrams, 1 gram of DHA each day for those 5 days for 6 months. And the main outcome in this study was related to illness. And this was particularly respiratory illness. And what our Thai colleagues identified was that the children in the group consuming the milk with the omega-3s were less likely to get ill. This was mainly respiratory illness. And here's some data here from the study. So in the control group, 67% of the kids developed an illness during the course of the study. This was lower with fish oil, was decreased down to around 50%. This was a significant effect. And then looking at those kids who became sick, how many days were they sick? And on average, in the control group, this was 4 days, whereas in the fish oil group, this was decreased to half that, down to 2 days. And again, this was significant. So if you think about kids of this age being sick, they can't go to school, this is a really significant effect in reducing both sickness, but also sickness days in those children who get sick. So I think this is part of the effect of the omega-3s, firstly in promoting host defense, and then secondly, in stopping the harmful effects of an individual once they become infected. The second study actually relates to COVID-19. This was a trial that I was involved in the late stages, carried out by some colleagues here in the UK, along with researchers in Sweden and in the US. This was actually an app-based study. So almost 500,000 users of a COVID-19 study app were involved in this study. And what they did was they self-reported their use of supplements, different types of supplements, and they also self-reported about positivity in COVID-19 tests. So here I show the data for the men and women together, and then separately for the women and the men. In the 3 different countries, the UK in red, the US in green, and Sweden in blue. And what this is showing is the odds, that is the likelihood of testing positive if you were using omega-3 supplements comparing to not using omega-3 supplements. And if there was no effect, the data would be on this line here. To the left of the line, what that means is those individuals consuming fish oil supplements were less likely to test positive. If the data were on the other side, they would be more likely to test positive. So what you see is when the data for the men and women were combined in each of the 3 different countries, there was a rather similar reduction in testing positive if the individuals were using omega-3 supplements compared to not. This held up for the women in the UK and the US, but not quite for the women in Sweden, and it held up for the men in Sweden, but not actually for the men in the UK and the US. So maybe there's some differences in some other things between the men and women that explain these differences between the 2 sexes. But importantly, when both sexes are combined, all 3 countries showed a rather similar reduction in testing positive in individuals using omega-3 supplements compared to not. Now, this might be due to this effect on supporting the immune system that I've talked about, but of course there are some other confounding factors, some of which we took into account, but we couldn't take everything into account because actually there are some unknowns in this sort of study. Anyway, just to wrap up now, COVID-19 has focused attention on immune health. People are interested in infection, they're interested in vaccinations, they're interested in remaining healthy in case, the coronavirus, of course, is still around, but what say other viruses come along. So I think immune health will remain an issue post-COVID. I've told you seafood is an excellent source of immune-supporting micronutrients, some of which, like vitamin D, are really hard to get from other foods. And seafood, of course, is an excellent source of bioactive omega-3s, EPA and DHA, especially fatty fish is rich in EPA and DHA. And these also have important roles in supporting the immune system and helping to control inflammation. So the bottom line of all of this is eat seafood, eat fish. Thanks very much for your attention.